Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Today we're going to be talking about a wonderful healing modality that will help people get into ship shape, at least mentally, especially when it comes to children. If you have someone who is suffering from perhaps ADD, they just don't have the right kind of focus, or perhaps they're just kind of falling short when it comes to learning in the classroom. On the program today, we're going to be talking with Mary Bowles. She is the founder of the Sensory Learning Center. She's going to be talking with us today about how we can actually use light, sound, and motion for sensory perception problems that can result in learning disabilities. I'd like to welcome to our program today our guest, Miss Mary Bowles. Mary, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, talk about what this is that you do at the Sensory Learning Center.
We're trying to contact the basic sensory systems of the body at the same time. So the motion of the moving table is accessing the vestibular system, the balance system, and that is the frame of reference for all the visual messages and most of the auditory. If you're dizzy, you can't take in anything visually. So we're contacting the vestibular system. We're contacting the visual system with light from developmental behavioral optometry, 6 different frequencies. So we're taking white light from the sun and putting it like a crumb of the cookie. We're making a sensory resource state that is very much different from the everyday life and asking the system to tune up to this. And the auditory as well is very good music, classical music of various types, but it is attenuated at random frequencies. So it feels like a radio station isn't coming in your car real well, or that someone has their hand on the volume button, making it go off and on. So all by itself, it's a little annoying, but the whole thing together is profoundly relaxing, and it allows the system to have more flexibility in meeting the everyday world.
Now, I'm curious about something, Mary. You know, how many of the, I guess you would call them, diagnoses of brain function, especially when it comes to children, are kind of almost interrelated to be about the same thing?
I think they're all very much on the same spectrum, indeed.
Okay. And so this is a way that a person can address these things, or, you know, kind
Absolutely.
of... Okay.
The participant in the program is going to be working in an intensive, just 12 straight days. Children do a half hour in the morning, say at 9 o'clock, and another half hour at 1:15. For 12 consecutive days, right through the weekend. And we have set the program up specifically for that child by doing a visual field, a listening profile, and visual field and visual motor testing, I should say. And so it's an intensive where we're asking this system to adapt to an unusual environment.
Seems reasonable enough. Now, what I'm kind of curious about, because, you know, this day and age, we're hearing so much more now about, for instance, autism. So could that fall under something like this where it can be worked with, or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Autistic children generally have their own individual mosaic of sensory issues, but they are definitely sensory issues. No 2 autistic children look exactly the same, but the sensory is very involved, and it's involved in so many ways of the way they can learn or communicate, in the way that they have very limited interests, in the way that they don't feel comfortable in their body, and in that they miss social cues,
Mm-hmm.
and they're often very, very sensitive to the environment. They're sensitive to light, they're sensitive to sound, and they're sensitive to high energy environments, like if there were a band going by or even a restaurant where there's a lot of background noise.
You know, Mary, over the many years we've been doing our program here, there was one particular person who came along with some work that really got me to thinking a lot about these things that we're seeing a lot more of in children, and that is, talking about autism. There was another one, Asperger's, that came along, attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity disorder. And, when I was a kid, I remember that ADD was something that my mother apparently said that I was dealing with. And, looking back on it, I was just probably a normal boy trying to settle down in a regular classroom. How hard is that for a kid in the first, second, and third grade? It wasn't that I wasn't, not learning anything. It's just, it's like, it's time to get out and play kind of a thing. But when you think of these things that are going on, one of the guests that came along I was reading about was Dr. Bruce Lipton in his book, The Biology of Belief. And he was talking about how research had shown that genes, for instance, aren't as fixed. In other words, that they have a way of being adaptable within a generation to two generations, I believe it is, and sometimes even faster, to the environment for evolutionary purposes. And I started thinking about that when that came across, and I started paying attention to how we're seeing such an increase in things like autism. Before, this was one of them rare things, and now it seems to be, 1 in 300 kids? I can't remember what the actual number is, but it's...
Right now, it's 1 in 88 children.
Well, see, there you go. So,
yep.
Now take a look at just that alone, and I'm almost positive it's going to increase again, And the point being is, look at our world. We've got advertising every which way but loose. You've got noise 24 hours a day. You have cell phones and technology in everybody's hands. I just don't know that humans were built for this, but yet now we're causing, pointing the finger saying, these kids need to adapt to this world or there's something wrong. And I think maybe genetically they have, to a point of shutting down, that they've learned biologically just to shut this nonsense down. That if you had gotten them back out in nature, it might unfold and not be such a problem. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that we look at the definition of sensory integration because it's that the sensory integration is the ability of the brain to internally organize sensory input and from that perception interact effectively with the environment. Okay, we just can't change our genes quickly.
Right.
They're turned on or they're turned off, and it takes many generations to really change things. So what has changed is the environment. The environment has changed in so many ways. So here we take the developing child. Every child, every person is really an antenna. And the right hemisphere, the visually dominant hemisphere that thinks in pictures, is the receiver, like on a radio. And now we're not receiving natural daylight. We're not receiving just the plain old regular natural sensory input. We really have electromagnetic pollution for this child today.
Right.
And a brain is not used to that. The developing child, an adult may be stressed by it all, but the developing child's brain doesn't know where to go with it. And so it's getting off developmental track. And what can we do to get it back on track? We have to change the individual environment as much as we can. More activity, be around less technology, have a more natural, unprocessed diet, and so forth. But if we do the sensory learning program, we're working with natural input to strengthen that little system.
Mm-hmm.
Or to strengthen the person with Alzheimer's. It's all the same thing.
Alzheimer's, really? Tell us about that.
I have had people come in who were in the medical field themselves, and they knew what Alzheimer's looked like, and they definitely had it. They were on medication for it. And their family brought them in. And as I would talk to them, I couldn't get through why it would be a good idea for them to do the work, but I gave them a sample session, an experiential session, a half hour on the table. And afterward, the family said, well, she's doing the work because she's not repeating herself anymore. Mm-hmm. She's more present. So the lady did do the work. It was a retired nurse. She did do the work. And she couldn't go to the grocery store before. Now she's going to the grocery store, cooking for her whole Bible study, entertaining. Her husband had to have surgery. She became the advocate in the hospital, took over the whole thing, got off some of her meds. That's what we did for Alzheimer's. And we do the same thing for adults that have brain injury, because once the system gets traumatized or begins to go in a disorganized direction, we need to make things basic, and we need to titrate out that trauma and allow the primitive part of the brain, where the sensory input come in, to begin to make shifts throughout the system.
Now this is, obviously it sounds like something that you developed. How did you come across these things? Did you just kind of put sort of, I guess, common sense together, or how did you come to this approach?
I graduated from college with a degree in philosophy and comparative religion and Far Eastern thought.
And who said those were useless degrees to pursue, right?
Yeah, right. Well, that was where my passion was. What's this world all about? How does it work?
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I had 4 children, and one of these children was from another planet, and wasn't comfortable in his own skin, and certainly went through kindergarten for 2 years, and on and on and on. And I said, well, all I know is you just can't let life scare you. That's what religion's all about. That's what the Far Eastern thinking, mysticism is. Go with nature, in the flow like a hollow reed. And so I thought, well, we've got to think of mudra, mantra, and mandala. What body position? What do we do with the visual system? What do we do with the auditory? And so I looked around at what kind of therapies were out, and I didn't really see anything wrong with the overall child. But what was wrong was he couldn't interact with the environment, everyday environments. And so I created an environment that would allow his system to get very calm and very much on top of its game.
And it stands to reason, as I was talking about earlier, if you think of gene evolution, that parents pass down to their children the survival mechanism that this is a dangerous world, this is a noisy world, this is a very confusing world. And then we say, well, now we're bearing abnormal children, and I think to myself, no, we're bringing in normal children into a world that humans just weren't really made for quite yet, but we're trying to adapt to as naturally and quickly as we can. And then you can see, then you try to pigeonhole, if you will, these children who are sort of shutting down, or they're not learning as, like they're supposed to be. And so what's the first thing you do is you start medicating, and that's the first line of, I guess, defense, if you will. And what you're talking about here just seems to make a lot more sense, especially when you consider the powerful prescription drugs that are available out there to treat children the way they are, whether, it's being an autistic child, an ADHD child. that, this is a time in their lives when brains are developing. That seems like a pretty dangerous mixture, wouldn't you think?
We have no idea what we're doing with the drugs.
Right.
It's a grand experiment. It's a grand experiment like all the electromagnetic pollution. We have no idea the real effect. It's all happening. Mm-hmm. But what we know is that a functional approach is safe. It is safe. If we can get the functioning of the individual system better organized, it has a chance to adapt and solve problems.
Fascinating stuff. Now, tell us as a child or even an adult, it sounds like it doesn't matter what the age is, what these sessions look like, and usually, what is the duration of the treatment?
It's really an intensive, which is just 12 days long. We start one day with evaluating, and then we work 12 consecutive days. And children do 2 half-hour sessions a day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And then adults can do 1 whole hour session. And so a session is a table that is like a single bed, and it is moving in a 7-inch circle. If a clock face were on your feet, it's moving around in a 7-inch circle. And one day it moves across your midline, and the next day it moves across your horizon line. And above your eyes, about 18 inches away, like if you were reading a book, would be a colored light instrument. And the colored light is slowly dimming and brightening from a 2.5-inch aperture opening. These are 6 different frequencies of colored light. And then you have headphones on, which are delivering music that is attenuated at random frequencies. And so the ears, we are changing the monitoring position of the stirrup bone against the oval window. We're getting it to back up and then go on and press onward. So it's changing that monitoring position, bringing it that we are always attentive to the sound. The light is, of course, accessing the visual system, and as the table moves, we have to move our light. We have to move our eyes, I should say. We have to move our eyes 3.5 inches in each direction to follow that light. And the interesting thing is, this is such an unusual environment because when you're moving on the table, the session room is very dark so that you can see that little light in the light instrument above your eyes. When you're moving on that table, you cannot tell you're moving. It seems like the light's moving. So there's the little trick. Uh-huh. That is a trick on the sensory systems to say, wake up and figure out what's going on, or just relax and be with it. It doesn't make any difference. We're working on your sensory systems, and they will know what to do. It's kind of like when you're stopped at a stoplight, car beside you backs up. You're not sure you're moving.
Yeah, you start hitting the brake pedal. They're like, God, why can't my car stop?
Right. So there you have that system, and what's going on is your brain waves are kind of just free running. You're not really concentrating on anything special, and you can't make sense out of all the sound. And what happens is our brain waves entrain with the Schumann resonance, which is the standing waves around the earth, the pulse of the earth, bringing us to a place as if we were meditating. And so people feel profoundly relaxed after the session. Their facial muscles are very relaxed. But as we learn those 6 different colors, we are changing the firing pattern of the hypothalamus, the main puppet master of the brain, so that it it knows how it feels to be in a revved up state, in a kind of a neutral state, and in a state of rest and regeneration. And changing state to be appropriate with the environment is basic to people. There are ebbs and flows in our environment. There are ebbs and flows in our energy that should match that environment.
Now, I understand this is something that even listeners today could go to their doctors, and this is something they can integrate into their practice. How relatively simple is this for someone to be able to do as far as bringing it into their own practice?
We sell them the equipment that I developed, and we will train them. We have 30 centers around the country, 4 in foreign countries.
Oh, wow. Well, saying that tells me that something here must be working because, as I understand, this was something you founded in 1997.
Actually, I've been doing it for over 20 years.
20 years, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going by your website, which was founded in 1997.
That's when I first brought in other providers.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, okay. But still, when you take a look at that, it's, in the scheme of things, a relatively new treatment, even though it's 20 years. I mean, that's still relatively new, that it's still catching on with what seems to be a fire pace.
Right. Overnight success only took 20 years, right? But yes, it has a high rate of success, really, and it's totally, totally safe.
Mary, tell us first of all what you experience or what parents bring when they bring children into. What do you see as common ages, and generally what are, besides the learning challenges they have, the other things they experience with their children? I know typically you'll hear anger bouts where they just kind of shout out, they get upset, they're frustrated, no patience, low tolerance level for, just those things that you've seen that this has really turned things around for.
Well, just basically being able to focus and concentrate. Better attention. That's a big one. That's a big one. Communication. A child being able to begin to talk. Motor planning. Children with low muscle tone, not able to handle activities with their feet off the ground, like learning to ride a two-wheel bike without the training wheels. After people do this, the children are just able to go ahead and do things like that. Handwriting improves. Most learning problems are around being able to get the words out fluently, speaking, and being able to write, and being able to hear things and remember them. So it's all kinds of behavior problems. Emotions are not stable generally, well, a lot of times you'll have a very bright child, though.
Right.
I'm not seeing children that are slow. I'm seeing children that are going 90 miles an hour with their hair on fire.
Sure.
They have the rhythm of a video game, but you put them in a classroom, and the child will go home and say, I heard those teachers talking about me. They tell their mother, and they said I was a scrawny elephant. Well, the mother talks to the school teachers, and the teachers say, we didn't say he was a scrawny elephant. We said he was a disturbing element. He couldn't sit still. He would just answer the questions before anybody else had a chance. He was way ahead of whatever they were doing, and he definitely couldn't sit still. Because you say the mouth, the hand, and the feet. These kids are not in control of those 3 parts of their body, and it causes them problems. The profoundly autistic child will be hand flapping near their eyes, saying a nonverbal sound, making a nonverbal sound, and toe walking. It's all the same thing in the top cortical area, the somatosensory strip, where you've got the mouth, the hands, and the feet taking up the most space. The sensory messages are not able to get up there. The brain is a self-organizing an organ, and it has to create a body map. Mm-hmm. And from that body map, interact effectively with the environment. Children are having lots of trouble with that.
It's so incredible how far we've come in the brain sciences to where it becomes disturbing, where we tended to treat before extensively in the brain areas of malfunction or dysfunction with drugs, that we're moving away from that, I hope, a lot more, because like you said, we really just don't know, for one, taking the basic ADD, ADHD situation, throw a drug at a kid, what you're really doing to a developing brain with such powerful things that they're doing, where something like this is such a natural approach for the brain to grow and learn from, which is what it was meant to do in the first place.
Right. When we have used psychotropic drugs, even amphetamines, and antidepressants, we don't have the system intact anymore. We can't access it as well. Maybe we can't access it at all. And so then a functional approach isn't an option that's really going to work nearly as well. And that's very unfortunate.
Now, this sounds to me, listening to this, that if you may live in a state or a city that doesn't have this available, and we'll give you the website here in a minute, listeners, so hang tight, that it's pretty easily adaptable or brought into an area that it's not?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. That's always very encouraging to know. Now, why don't you go ahead and give your website out, Mary, and that way people can find out more about this.
It's www.sensory, SENSORY, learning, LEARNING.com.
Now, are you experiencing, or is this modality experiencing more notoriety into the mainstream, or do you find it still being shadowed like a lot of other great healing modalities out there by, well, this is the way we'd prefer the public to do things?
There have been so many more programs developed for autistic children. Programs developed in the last 20 years. So there's so much more that parents have to say are possibly an option, and they're just not sure what to do.
Sure.
And so medical people certainly are the ones that they first consult, and drugs probably lead the way. It's just that we really aren't looking to nature as the first thing to do. That isn't where we're taking our guidance.
Unfortunate. Well, we're feeling encouraged that is changing. I think people are just becoming a lot more astute about, information. Where does it come from? The choices they do have available. That is definitely a goal of our show, is to show different choices, preferably more natural ones, such as this, so that people, can take the next best step. Because again, when you think about these developing children and what we tend to do, and I mean, even myself, when I was a child and there was a potential for ADD, I believe it was Ritalin, half a pill, a day sort of a thing, and Oh, yeah, he's doing great in class. He settles down, and my mother says, I think I'm going to take him off of this nonsense because he's becoming a zombie, and I'm not going to put up with that kind of stuff. And I'll just deal with it, kind of a thing. But, it's really amazing, that we're so easily medicating our children. And like you said, you just don't really know what the long-term effects are. But something like this is very natural. It's very integrative, to the point that you can see that it would actually be effective, I would think, in the long term.
I mean, what I've really done is just develop the equipment to allow us to put 3 sensory-based therapies into one therapy and to allow it to be done simultaneously. So the moving table is simulating what it does to us when we ride a horse.
Right.
Or when we would roll over and over like a log on the floor. Children aren't as active today as they used to be. They don't play outside.
Oh, God, you have no idea. I mean, when you see a 3-year-old getting their first cell phone I was just talking about last night, I'm like, are you kidding me? I remember when I was growing up, and here it goes, I can't believe sometimes the things I'm saying, but, yeah, there was one telephone in the house, and you had to fight for the time on it if you had a girlfriend, And
a child on a cell phone for just 3 minutes, their brain is unorganized for an hour.
Oh, my goodness. See, I don't own them. I had one once, and I felt like this was almost like having a heroin addiction, so I just got rid of it because, anyway. But you see people so disconnected like that now,
Well, we're disconnected from nature. We really are. And so the auditory work came in from France, and the visual work came in from Europe. And so these are very old, basic therapies that, while we have a whole lot more out there today, it has only sprung from these and being a different format.
Fascinating stuff. I always tend to hear that it's always in Europe that they're doing all these things for years, and I'm thinking, but in the United States we're so far behind, it sounds like, but yet consider ourselves to be the superpower ahead of the game. It leaves you kind of just dumbfounded sometimes. Sensory Learning Center International. Our guest today, Mary Bowles, its executive director, and the website is sensorylearning.com, correct?
Correct.
Very good. What a pleasure to have you on the program today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You bet. I want to thank you, the listener out there, for tuning in. Again, you want to go to sensorylearning.com, and that's where you can find out more about this. Take this as a first approach, a more natural approach. We again thank you for tuning in. This is Beyond 50. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. We'll also have a hot link for this particular website there as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Remember, live your day past halfway.